Imagine this. A federal judge in a case that already has the country on edge suddenly does something no judge has dared to do in 249 years. Not a small move, not a quiet procedural decision. A move so extreme it rewrites the rules of the game and forces the entire political system into a corner. The judge didn't just rule, he effectively set a deadline that turns the next 72 hours into a countdown to an impeachment vote. Yes, you heard that right, impeachment. Not in months, not in the next election cycle, but in 72 hours. And this isn't just about politics. This is about a courtroom setting a timeline that the entire nation now has to follow, because the judge's move isn't just historic, it's explosive. It puts the entire government on a collision course. It forces lawmakers, the media, and the public to react fast, and it leaves one question burning in everyone's mind. What could be so urgent, so dangerous that a judge would break centuries of precedent just to push Congress into action? In this moment, the story is no longer about the legal case. It's about a judge who just triggered a constitutional storm. And the next 72 hours will decide whether the system holds or whether the country spirals into chaos. So stay with me, because what happens next is not just history, it is the future of American democracy. To understand why this is such a seismic moment, you have to understand what the judge actually did. Because this is not just another ruling, not another headline, not another legal twist. This is a judge using the power of the courtroom to force Congress into a decision. In normal times, a federal judge might issue a ruling, set a date, or hand down a sentence. But this is different. This judge didn't simply rule on the case. He set a deadline that effectively says, Congress, you have 72 hours to act. And that is where the shock comes from. Because for 249 years, impeachment has been treated as a political process, not a judicial one. It has been the exclusive domain of Congress, with the House deciding whether to impeach and the Senate deciding whether to convict. But now, a judge has inserted the judiciary into the timeline, and that changes everything. The judge's order is not just about speed, it's about pressure. It's about forcing lawmakers to choose quickly between loyalty and duty, between political strategy and constitutional responsibility. And this is the moment where the story gets even more intense, because the judge didn't give Congress time to deliberate. He didn't give them time to negotiate. He didn't give them time to play political games. He gave them 72 hours. And in those 72 hours, everything changes. The question is not whether Congress will act. The question is how they will act. Will they move quickly as the judge demands? Or will they resist, claiming that a judge has no right to dictate their timeline? And if they resist, what happens next? Because the judge's order is not just a deadline, it is a challenge to the entire system and to the balance of power that has existed for centuries. And now the clock is ticking. Now let's zoom out and look at what this means for the political system. Because when a judge forces an impeachment vote in 72 hours, it doesn't just affect one man. It affects the entire country and the entire structure of power. First, it puts Congress under a spotlight it has never faced before. Lawmakers will be forced to make a decision that could define their careers, their party, and their legacy. Some will see it as a moment of accountability, a chance to prove that no one is above the law. Others will see it as a political trap designed to force them into a corner and damage their future. And then there's the GOP, which is already split between Trump loyalists and those who have quietly grown tired of the chaos. This deadline changes the game, because now every Republican has to publicly choose a side, and there is no room to hide. If they support impeachment, they risk the wrath of Trump's base and the backlash of MAGA voters. If they oppose it, they risk being seen as complicit in what many Americans believe is a pattern of abuse of power and corruption. The judge's order turns the party into a pressure cooker, and in a pressure cooker, things explode. We are already seeing whispers behind closed doors, private conversations between lawmakers, and frantic calls to strategists. Some Republicans are considering a compromise, trying to avoid a full impeachment while still appearing to take action. Others are preparing to resist, arguing that the judge has overstepped and that Congress should not be dictated by the judiciary. But the most dangerous part of this situation is not the politics, it's the timing. Because this is happening in the middle of an election cycle, with tensions already high and the country already divided. And now, with the judge forcing an impeachment vote in 72 hours, the political temperature is about to spike. This is not just a legal drama, this is a national emergency of the political kind. And the next 72 hours will reveal who is willing to stand up for the rule of law and who is willing to stand with power no matter the cost. To understand the magnitude of this moment, you have to understand the history behind it. Impeachment is one of the most serious powers Congress holds, and it has always been treated as a political tool, not a judicial one. The framers of the Constitution designed impeachment as a check on power, a way for the legislative branch to hold the executive accountable without the court stepping in. That separation has always been clear, even during the most chaotic moments in American history. But now, for the first time in 249 years, a federal judge has crossed that boundary. And that is why this is not just a legal story, it is a constitutional crisis. Think back to the last time impeachment was used. In every case, Congress set its own timeline. They investigated, debated, and then voted when they were ready. There was no external force pushing them, no deadline imposed by a court, no judge demanding an immediate decision. Even during the Watergate scandal, when the country was in the middle of an unprecedented crisis, Congress still moved at its own pace. Even during the impeachment of Bill Clinton and the more recent impeachment of Donald Trump, Congress controlled the timeline. The judicial branch stayed out of it because the framers intended it to be a political process, not a legal one. So when a judge issues an order that effectively forces Congress to act in 72 hours, it is not just unusual, it is unprecedented. It rewrites the unwritten rules of American governance. And it raises a terrifying question. If a judge can force Congress to act, what else can the judiciary dictate? Because the moment you allow one branch to set the timeline for another, you change the balance of power. You change the meaning of separation of powers. You change the nature of American democracy. And that is why the judge's order is not just historic, it is dangerous, because it sets a precedent that could be used again and again and again. And once that precedent exists, it cannot be erased. So the question is not just what Congress will do in the next 72 hours. The question is, what kind of country America will become if this becomes the new normal? To understand why the judge's order is so explosive, we need to go back to the courtroom to the moment everything changed. This wasn't a simple hearing. It wasn't a routine motion. It was a tense, high-stakes showdown that had the atmosphere of a political thriller. The judge, known for his strict, non-nonsense style, had already been under pressure from both sides. The defense team argued that the case was politically motivated and that the judge was overstepping his authority. Meanwhile, prosecutors pushed back, saying that the evidence was overwhelming and that the rule of law could not be ignored. But then something happened that no one expected. The judge, after listening to arguments and weighing the legal implications, made a decision that stunned everyone in the room. He issued an order that not only moved the case forward, but forced Congress into a direct timeline. The judge's reasoning was simple, yet shocking. He argued that the situation had escalated beyond a typical case and that the constitutional implications were too urgent to be delayed. He said that Congress had failed to act and that the only way to prevent a constitutional crisis was to force action now. And with that, he set the 72-hour deadline. The courtroom reaction was immediate. The defense team, stunned, demanded an immediate appeal, claiming the judge had overstepped. They argued that the judiciary has no authority to dictate congressional timelines and that the order was unconstitutional. The prosecutors, on the other hand, argued that the judge was right, that the nation was on the brink of a crisis, and that Congress had been dragging its feet for too long. But the most shocking part was the silence from the gallery, because everyone understood what this meant. This was not just a legal decision, it was a historical moment. A judge had effectively put Congress on notice, and the entire country was now watching to see whether lawmakers would obey. And as the order was read, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The judge looked at the defense team, then at the prosecutors, then at the gallery, and said, "The clock starts now." And in that moment, the story stopped being about a single case. It became about the future of the entire system. Once the judge's order went public, the reaction started pouring in from every corner of the political world. But the most intense response came from the one place everyone was watching, the center of power, the White House, and the Trump team. Trump himself did not wait long to respond. In a video statement released within minutes, he accused the judge of acting like a dictator, claiming the order was illegal and unconstitutional. He used his signature language, calling the court rigged and saying that the country was being destroyed by a corrupt system. His supporters immediately echoed the same narrative. On social media, the word coup began trending within minutes. Conservative commentators started framing the judge as a political enemy, not a legal authority. But behind the scenes, the White House staff was scrambling. Advisors were holding emergency calls, trying to figure out how to control the damage, how to keep the base energized, and how to prevent the GOP from fracturing even further. Trump's legal team, meanwhile, prepared to file an immediate emergency appeal, arguing that the judge had no authority to dictate congressional timelines. They were ready to take the fight to a higher court, hoping to delay the process and buy time. But the problem is, time was exactly what the judge had taken away. The 72-hour deadline meant that the legal team had to act fast and the White House had to act faster. And then there was the political calculation, because if Trump attacked the judge too aggressively, it could backfire. It could make him look like he was undermining the justice system, and it could alienate some moderate voters. But if he stayed quiet, it could make him look weak. So the White House was stuck between two dangerous options. Meanwhile, lawmakers in Trump's party were receiving a flood of calls from donors, strategists, and voters. Some were told to publicly oppose impeachment. Others were warned that they could lose their seats if they did not support Trump. It was a chaotic, high-stakes moment, and everyone knew that the next 72 hours would determine the future of the party. And in the middle of it all, the judge's order continued to loom over Washington like a ticking time bomb. Because the reality is this: no matter what happens next, the country has entered a new phase. A phase where the courts are no longer just deciding cases, they are shaping political timelines. And in a nation already on edge, that is a dangerous, explosive development. By now, the judge's order had done what it was meant to do. It forced the Capitol to move at a speed it was not built for. The usual slow grind of politics was gone. The next 72 hours were now a forced sprint, and everyone knew the consequences of falling behind. Within hours, the Senate Majority Leader called an emergency caucus meeting, not a normal press event, not a scheduled hearing, but a closed-door session with only the most senior members present. The message was clear. This is not a normal day, this is not a normal week, and no one should act like it is. In that room, lawmakers did what they always do when the pressure is high. They started making deals. They started calculating who would survive the storm and who would be swept away. Some members argued that the impeachment vote should be delayed, that the judge had overstepped, and that Congress should assert its independence. They wanted to challenge the court's authority and fight the order. Others argued the opposite. They said the judge had given them a rare chance to take decisive action to finally hold Trump accountable, and that they should seize the moment. They saw the deadline as an opportunity, not a threat. But the most revealing part of that meeting was what happened in the hallways. There were whispers of secret negotiations between lawmakers and top Republicans trying to secure votes, trying to promise committee assignments, trying to threaten primary challengers. Because the reality is, in Washington, power is never given away. It is traded, bought, and negotiated. And when the stakes are this high, the deals get dirty fast. Meanwhile, the Speaker of the House was under intense pressure. She was receiving calls from the White House, from party leaders, from donors, and from activists. Everyone wanted her to act, but no one agreed on what action she should take. And that is the heart of the crisis. This is not just a legal showdown. This is a political civil war. The judge's order didn't just push Congress to act. It exposed the fractures inside the Republican Party. It forced lawmakers to choose between loyalty to Trump, loyalty to the Constitution, and loyalty to their own careers. Because the truth is, the judge's order was not just a deadline. It was a trap that forced every lawmaker to reveal who they really were and what they were willing to risk. And as the clock ticked down, the Capitol became a pressure cooker. Every conversation, every vote, every decision now had a weight that could change the course of the country. The next 72 hours were not just a timeline. They were a test of whether American democracy could survive a moment like this, or whether it would crack under the strain the clock was now screaming. The 72-hour deadline was no longer a concept. It was a living, ticking threat, and everyone in the Capitol could feel it in their bones. By this point, the impeachment resolution had been drafted, revised, and revised again. It was a political weapon carefully sharpened to do maximum damage while still surviving a legal fight. Every word mattered because every word could be used against them in court or in the court of public opinion. But the real drama wasn't the text itself. The drama was the vote. Because even with the judge's order pushing them forward, there was no guarantee the House would have the numbers. There was no guarantee the Senate would convict, and there was no guarantee the country would survive the chaos that would follow. So the question became, would they do it anyway? Some lawmakers were already publicly signaling they would vote yes no matter what. They believed the country had reached a point where inaction was no longer an option. They argued that Trump had repeatedly shown he would ignore the law, threaten democracy, and destabilize the nation, and that impeachment was the only tool left to stop him. Others were still terrified, not of the law, not of the facts, but of the political consequences. They feared the MAGA base. They feared the primary. They feared the violent backlash from Trump supporters. They feared being labeled as traitors, as Rhinos, as enemies of the movement, and they feared the worst part of this entire situation. They feared that even if they succeeded, it might not be enough, because Trump had built a base that was not just loyal, but furious, and fury is not easily calmed. As the hours counted down, the Capitol became a storm center. Security was ramped up. Staffers were on edge. Reporters were flooding the halls. Every committee room, every hallway, every office was a scene of intense pressure. And then, in the final hour, the House floor was called, the chamber filled with lawmakers, cameras, and the kind of tension that does not usually exist in a place built for routine governance. The Speaker called the session to order. The resolution was read. The roll call began. This was the moment that would define the country for years to come. As the votes were cast, it became clear that the impeachment would pass, not by a landslide, but by enough to make history. The gavel fell, the resolution was approved, and in that moment, the Capitol erupted. Some lawmakers cheered, some cried, some looked stunned, as if they could not believe what had just happened. Outside, the reaction was immediate. Protesters gathered. Both sides flooded the streets. The nation was already divided, and now the division had been formalized into a constitutional action. Trump supporters called it a coup. Trump opponents called it a necessary defense of democracy. And in the middle of it all, Trump was watching. His social media feeds exploded with rage. He posted threats, accusations, and calls for retaliation. He claimed the system was rigged, that the judges were corrupt, that the lawmakers had betrayed the country. And this was the dangerous part because impeachment is not just a political process. It is a message. It is a signal that the country has reached a breaking point and that the Constitution is being used as a shield. But Trump was not just a politician. He was a movement. And movements do not end with a vote. They end with a reaction. So the real question became, what happens next? Will the Senate convict? Will the country calm down? Will the courts intervene? Or will this impeachment trigger a deeper crisis, a political firestorm that could tear the country apart? Because one thing was clear. The judge's order had forced the moment, but it had not solved the problem. It had only exposed it. And the next chapter was about to begin. America had just taken a step into uncharted territory, and no one knew where it would